of surgery and how it improved to the standards that we expect today, we moved beyond just anaesthetics to also look at antiseptics and the fight against infection. Remember, there are three barriers to successful surgery in modern times: the conquest of pain through anaesthetics, the conquest of infection through antiseptics and later antibiotics, and finally the issue of blood loss that we will come to eventually. In order to understand the further conquest of pain, we have to look at the work of Simpson and his work with anaesthetics, and the work of Lister and his work with antiseptics. So where we are in the course, well, we're still dealing with the 1700 to 1900 section of the course and the extent and change in care and treatments. We've looked at hospital care and Nightingale's work, the impact of anaesthetics and antiseptics on surgery. So we're progressing very well through the course. Okay, so unscramble the words. I will give you a list of 10 scrambled words. I will then give you the chance to pause the video. You need to be able to unscramble all of them, and then consequently you need to be able to understand the significance of each of those key words. As an independent learner, you will need to make notes of what you have and have not understood. Please pause the video. Okay, so as we unscramble the words, what I now need you to be able to do is tell me the significance of each of these words, and please make sure that you write down anything you are unclear about. So firstly, cholera. We've looked at a series of great plagues from the Black Death of the 14th century through to the Great Plague of the 17th century. The Great Plague of the 19th century was the waterborne disease, cholera, and that links to the work of number 3 that we get to in a moment. Laissez-faire. The government's attitude was that it was not responsible for the health of the people. Government at the start of the 19th century was small and only interested in collecting taxes and defending the country. The health and the well-being of its people were not a priority. But as discoveries and progress are made during the 19th century, it becomes harder and harder for the government not to step in. For example, the work of Edward Jenner and smallpox. So they organised the vaccinations. 3. John Snow, the man who proved that cholera was waterborne. We've already looked at the case study of the Broad Street pump. 4th, public health. When the government is responsible for the health of its own people. A laissez-faire government isn't interested, but a more hands-on and proactive government like we have today, with the role of the welfare state and the NHS, that clearly is anything but laissez-faire. 5. Florence Nightingale, the first woman we look at on the course. Her significance was in the area of nursing and hospital reform. She applies some of the scientific methods and process and rationality of the 19th century to improving hospital care after her study of the appalling nursing conditions during the Crimean War. Spontaneous generation, number 6, was the rational explanation for how wounds get infected, that the infection spontaneously emerges from the wounds. Obviously, this is before germ theory of 1861 and is linked to the rational but wrong ideas like miasma. Germ theory is the discovery of Louis Pasteur, which is then built upon by the German bacteriologist Robert Koch. Remember their rivalry. One was French, one was German, and that spurred them on to discoveries. And 8 is indeed Robert Koch, the German rival and contemporary of Louis Pasteur. Vaccinations, the work of Edward Jenner, smallpox and cowpox, and there is Jenner at the end. Remember, the limitation of Jenner's work was that he didn't understand how it worked, and also, of course, thousands of scientists invested time in trying to find diseases that prevented other diseases, and of course there is no other example that we are now aware of. So place each of these events into their correct period: medieval, Renaissance, or industrial. Okay, if you need reminding of the dates, please go back to the overview slide where you tick off each of the parts of the syllabus. The dates are presented there for you. Okay, so the first one is the printing press, and that is in the Renaissance. Miasma theory, that's all the periods. Until 1861, that was the believed way with which infection spread. Spontaneous generation theory, all the way through until the 19th century, when it's put out of business by germ theory. The Black Death, that's the Middle Ages, the medieval period, 1348. Florence Nightingale, the Lady with the Lamp, the 19th century, and the first woman to be mentioned by name in our course. John Snow, his work against cholera, proving it's waterborne, was the 19th century. Louis Pasteur, the French chemist, the 19th century. His theory of germ theory, 1861, a crucial date in the course. Robert Koch, his contemporary, from Germany, across the River Rhine, the great rivalry between the French and the Germans that would eventually end in war, or several wars. He was the 19th century as well. William Harvey, the physiologist of the Renaissance, the man who said that the heart was a pump and blood circulated around the body through the veins and arteries and the capillaries that he could not find. Vesalius, the anatomist from the Renaissance, who was the teacher at the same university that William Harvey studied at later. Care not cure, the medieval period. Illness and disease was God-given, therefore it was the Christian duty to care for the sick, but curing them was not their responsibility, nor something that they knew how to do anyway. The Royal Society, founded during the Renaissance in England, free from the power of the Catholic Church, where clever men, well-educated, wealthy men could discuss science and add to progress without fear of the repercussions of the Catholic Church. The Great Plague, 1665. Be aware of the similarities and differences between the way in which the plague and the Black Death, though 350 years apart, were dealt with. Germ theory, 19th century, 1861, the work of Louis Pasteur. And the public health acts that you need to be aware of, the 19th century. The first one of 1848, inspired by Edwin Chadwick, that asked that councils improved the public health conditions of their citizens, but wasn't compulsory. And the 1875 Second Public Health Act, which was compulsory, which is after the discovery of germs being the cause of disease. Both illustrate the breakdown of laissez-faire, the government becoming more and more involved in the health of its people. Dissection, that started to be practiced during the Renaissance. It was strictly banned by the Catholic Church during the medieval period. So today's work, the work of James Simpson and the work of Joseph Lister. Simpson, associated with the discovery of chloroform as an anesthetic, and Joseph Lister, who discovered that carbolic acid would kill germs, therefore developing the world's first practical antiseptic. What was surgery like in the 19th century? Well, hopefully you've watched the documentary Scream and you will know how to be able to express that answer really rather graphically. It was brutal, and it was actually a form of entertainment. People would watch. Operating theatres are called theatres because people used to go to watch. No anaesthetic meant that the patients would be in agony and had to be held down. Remember, we've studied barber surgeons, men with sharp tools who were physically strong, who were able to operate on patients. What inferences, therefore, can you make from that picture? An example, then, Ovarionotomy, the removal of diseased ovaries in women, was coming along, and one of our surgeons was keen on it. His mortality rate was around 80%. I used to dread seeing notice of this operation, as I knew that in a few days the patient would be probably lying on the post-mortem table. 80% mortality, 80% of the patients operated on would die. What inferences can you make about surgery from that statement? One of our surgeons lectured upon anatomy in an old frock coat. I can see him now pawing at the dissection as he lectured upon it. When it was past evening, even this work he took it up to the operating theatre. The idea was a good one. Why should he soil a good frock coat when a discarded one was available? An operation was a dirty job, and an old coat was a suitable garment. I see it now, all faded with age, stained with blood, and spotted with pus. What inferences can you make about surgery in the 19th century from that description? I inserted a narrow knife about a foot long. I cut along the bone, separating it from its socket. Finally, I passed the knife around the top of the bone, cutting the remaining ligaments. This ended the operation, which had not taken more than 1 minute. My assistant slackened the tourniquet around the leg so that we could see how bad the bleeding was. It seemed at first sight as if there were so many blood vessels that they could never all be closed, and we knew we must work quickly to prevent the patient's death. What inferences can you make about surgery? Robert Liston was a very successful surgeon who was proud of his ability to amputate a leg in just a couple of minutes. His record was said to be 28 seconds. In one case, trying to beat his own speed record, he cut off the patient's testicles, and in another operation he cut off the assistant's fingers. The assistant later died from the infection. What can you infer about surgery from that description? So now we have an insight into what surgery was like, and we are aware of the 3 barriers to successful surgery: the barrier of pain, the barrier of infection, and the barrier of blood loss. I would like you to read the pre-printed reading materials in your booklet. If you don't have them, the reading materials are available as a video read to you. I will provide you with the link, and I would like you to complete the table. Again, that should be pre-printed in your booklet. If not, I will provide the worksheet for you. Please make sure that using this information, this table is completely populated. Please note, how did they make their discoveries? Why was there opposition? Remember that key word of people being conservative. And why were their discoveries a turning point? You may even wish to go further, and again, think about that extension task always. What were the limitations of their discoveries? Please note in the who are they section, they are wealthy, educated men. Upon completion of this video, you will be aware that the PowerPoint attached has additional materials to recap and also undertake exam practice. Please do so.